Welcome to the kbbreview podcast. My name is still Andy Davies, just about, and our regular panel of Trevor, Liz, Justine and Nick are all here ready to get going with this week's episode. Firstly, quick apology for those that listen every week for the irregularity of the last couple of shows. It's entirely my fault, as I have been poorly sick. Still am, truth be told. You can probably tell just by listening to me. But today's show is a real doozy, and we're discussing what happens when products fail on site, when deliveries arrive damaged, and whether it's possible to actually check deliveries when they arrive within the constraints given to you by suppliers. Do you get the help you need? Do you feel that they just don't believe you straight away? Who should pick up the cost for all the inconvenience? And is it just a total pain in the backside that sucks hours out of your day unnecessarily? It's all here in this week's show, but first, with entries now closed for the kbbreview Retail and Design Awards 2026, attention turns to judging, and fingers crossed, we'll be announcing the shortlist in a special episode of this very podcast on Tuesday, December the 16th. In the meantime, you need to start thinking about your tickets to the event itself, which is on March the 2nd at the Hilton Birmingham Metropole. That's the Monday night of the KBB show. There'll be around 800 or so of the industry's top retailers, designers, suppliers and influencers, so you don't want to miss it. Everything you need to know is at kbbreview.com/awards, and you can book your tickets directly there too. See you there. So here is, as always, Trevor Scott from RFK and Rugby. Hello, Trevor.
Good morning.
Good morning to you. We've got Justine Bullock from the Tap End near Cardiff. Hello, Justine.
Good morning. Hello.
Hello. We've got Liz PJ, Liz Pantling-Jones from Lima Kitchens in Milton Keynes. Hello, Liz.
Hello.
Hello. And we've got Nick Warrington from Stuart J Warrington in Macclesfield. Hello, Nick.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning to you too. You're all very bright and breezy. I don't feel very well, you see. So you're going to have to keep me going for this whole conversation because I might drop off and hit the microphone with my forehead. So we're going to talk about orders and returns and damaged products and all that kind of stuff today. And for people that might have heard it before, it's been triggered by your recent experience, Justine. But for those who haven't heard the saga of the broken baths on previous episodes, give us a quick recap of what actually happened.
So in the past 6 months, I've had 3 different composite baths split in half, all whilst full of water. 2 of them were the same manufacturer and one of them was a different manufacturer. I would say one is high-end and 2 are mid-end.
But it was the same customer, got 2 of them. 2
of them went to the same customer, which obviously then the second time it happened, it sparked loads of investigation, because to happen once, you could say, is manufacturing fault. To happen twice, we really had to dig a bit deeper the second time and find out more. But yeah, basically, regardless of whatever reasons, 3 baths split in half in the past 6 months.
I mean, that is the most catastrophic thing, isn't it? A bath full of water splits in half, all the water goes through the ceiling, I'm assuming.
Yes, it did.
So how do you handle that with the customer? Because obviously there's the cost of the bath. You can replace the bath, but there's also a huge amount of damage, presumably, to the floor and the ceiling. And so who covers that? Who's in charge of that?
So the first time it happened, I was away. I was in London, so the girls were in the showroom on their own. So they had a call from the customer, obviously, incredibly angry, as I would be. This original bath, it was something like £5,000 or £4,000. So I would be raging too. So they understand that. They tried to deal with the situation. I think I was either abroad or I was in London, or a combination of the two. I was on my way back. So the girls got in the car and they went to the customer's house, which I didn't ask them to do. They just did that off their own back, which was amazing. And, made me feel as a owner, manager, incredibly supported by the team, even though it wasn't their customer, it was actually my customer. So they went to the house, they tried to diffuse the situation. Then they tried to speak to the manufacturer and the rep. And really, it was kind of battered off a little bit. And then I had to kind of deal with it then when I was back. But I didn't even get a phone call off the manufacturer. I didn't even get a phone call off the rep. I basically had to fight for an engineer to go, and, no phone call to the customer. I actually asked. I said, I'm away. The girls are in the shop on their own. My business partner just retired, so she was no longer there. So I said, I really need someone to contact this customer. Can you contact this customer? I copied 2 people in, our rep and our rep's boss, and neither of them did. They said, no, we're in a sales meeting. I know someone else that this has happened to as well, and it was a way bigger issue than I had. A way, way bigger issue. So when I know someone from the same manufacturer that also had a big issue, and then I was just, oh no, we're not going to phone anyone, just send us the form. I just thought, wow, I'm like actually enraged. But I'm very like a quietly enraged person. So I don't scream and shout. I kind of just think, right, I'm really going to think about that. I'm going to think about how they dealt with that situation. And I'm not going to force people to do anything. I'm just going to think about how that made me feel and think about what's going to happen if we have issues like that in the future, rather than screaming and shouting, because, where does that get us? But in the end, the engineers came weeks later. I'm talking like weeks and weeks later. So I had to keep my customer sweet for weeks. And it was a manufacturing fault. And that just made it all the worse. And even after that, I didn't get a phone call. Even after that, I didn't.
That is a very catastrophic situation. It's a very extreme situation. Liz, is there an equivalent of this where a tap goes wrong or something and you just end up wasting hours and hours and hours on trying to sort something out, which should be quite straightforward?
I'm not going to say equivalent because that situation is definitely far worse. But recently we've had a sink manufacturer issue where it looked like there was a film or lime scale or something on the sink. So they kept saying that it was a cleaning issue. And when it was wet, it would look fine. But as soon as it dried properly, all of those marks would come back. And it took us 3.5 months, I think, to get them to agree to replace it. And that was simply because I tracked down the CEO on LinkedIn and called and just shared that after pretty much 2 decades of solidly supporting them and having 2 of their sinks in my own home, I know it's not limescale, and I expect that on the one occasion I phone and say it's an issue for them to support me. As far as I was concerned, it's as simple as that. We're not a high maintenance account. We sell the products, we install the products, we go away, we sort out all of the issues. So when we do ask for support, we expect to get it.
The sheer hours that are wasted, both at your end and their end, really, just trying to sort it out, and emails back and forth and phone calls back and forth.
They stopped responding to us, which is where I stepped in. So I normally don't get involved with that side of things, but it was just at a point where they refused to speak to any of our staff. They weren't coming back on emails because it wasn't their fault. And then they said that they wouldn't help us with installation costs. So taking out an undermount sink, having to take out the finger rails, it was quite an involved job. And yeah, they were like, well, it's not our responsibility, it's not a faulty product, and they don't want the sink back to check that it definitely isn't a faulty product.
Is this ringing any bells with you, Nick?
Yes, we've had similar issues. We've been quite fortunate with sinks, not had any substantive issues with those. A couple of cracked composites here and there, but been able to get away with replacements fairly easily. I've had an issue this year with some doors that they're a stained oak door, and the first batch arrived, and unfortunately one of the doors had some damage from transit, so that had to be replaced. The replacement turned up even though we sent the original door back to colour match, the replacement came back a completely different colour. The replacement of the replacement came back a completely different shade again, which then triggered the client to then borrow the sample from the showroom, take it back to her house and hold it against all the doors to realise that the reason that the later doors were coming through darker was the original batch she had were all substantially lighter than the sample that she'd purchased. Again, cut a long story short, we ended up with the area sales manager making a visit, and they've agreed to replace all of the doors. But again, the replacement cost is down to us, and obviously doors themselves are not too bad. Drill some holes, get them on. The cab's fairly straightforward, but there's quite a few panels that we've got to take out, and they've all got to be cut and scribed. So there's a couple of days' work there.
And when you've got a guy out doing that, that's him not fitting another kitchen somewhere else, isn't it? You've got to completely rejig your entire schedule just to go and sort out a problem that wasn't of your making.
Yeah, we've got to fit it into our schedule. So, I've got to pay a fitter. There's a loss of opportunity in terms of, I don't have too many jobs on at any one time. So if he's not doing that, he could be doing something else that would actually be earning me money rather than costing me money. Yeah.
So, Trevor, if you multiply that by the size of your business, all these hours, all these man hours, all these extra little charges, they all add up. It's not an insubstantial amount of cost to you to correct issues that aren't of your making.
No, well, I mean, it's in quoting terms, I suppose, it's like a dripping tap. There's a buggeration factor that's always built into every job, and it might only be a relatively small amount, and in hopefully most jobs it never gets dipped into. But the cumulative effect is that we've got a relatively small pot of money that is set aside that we can then use to pay fitters outside of the contract to go back and do remedials. That are not of their making. And it is important to make that distinction because I mean our installers are all subcontract, self-employed, so they're responsible for their own work. And if they cock something up, then we expect them to go and put it right at their expense. But equally, if it's either our cock up or our suppliers cock up, then we've got to put our hands in our pockets and pay for them. Sometimes that can prove quite expensive and is nowhere near met by the installation repay system of pretty much every supplier that we deal with. When you're offered something like 60 quid for refitting a sink and taps, that doesn't get them in the van and on the road to the job, let alone cover the costs of them trying to extricate an undermount sink from stone work surfaces that have been in for 6 to 9 months. You can see the dilemma there. I mean, our first point of interest always is making sure that the customer is happy. Get that sorted first and foremost, and then have the argument with the supplier about who's going to pay for it down the road.
Do you think, Justine, that suppliers just don't understand the impact that this kind of stuff has? Are they sort of detached enough from the front line of it all to just not really get it? As far as they're concerned, all they've got to do is ship another box out.
I think they do understand. A lot of reps, they've come from showroom backgrounds, so I think they do understand. I think a lot of times decisions are out of their control, and I get that. I get that people can't just authorise replacement products if they're very expensive or authorise fitting costs. And I also understand from a commercial perspective that if they were covering refitting costs just left, right and centre for every issue, that's not financially viable. It is the lack of maybe this kind of culture for a lack of apologising. I think that the last time I heard a really heartfelt apology from a manufacturer was like years ago, before COVID, I think there is a trend for just, don't accept liability, don't apologise for anything, don't back us into a corner that we're going to have to pay for something. It's just a bit wild, isn't it? You deal with people and then sometimes you don't get a very, people-y response.
But this whole thing is so counter to the way that you guys as independents operate. As Trevor says, you sort the problem out first and then you kind of have the argument afterwards. But they're sort of doing it the other way around. They're having the argument first and then sorting the problem out afterwards. Play devil's advocate here. When I talk to suppliers and manufacturers, they will always say that the vast majority of products failing in situ are an installation issue. They haven't been installed correctly. That's what they will always say. Do you buy that, Trevor, or not? Is that a fair comment?
I'd love to be party to the service engineers training course lesson 101, where I'm convinced that issue number one that is raised is always look for an excuse not to do this job under warranty. Have a close look at how that fridge has been installed and point your finger and wag at it and say it's not being installed correctly. Therefore, this service call is now the responsibility of the retailer as opposed to us, the manufacturer. Now, every manufacturer I know will deny that, but it's happened so often that I just simply don't believe them.
But the thing is, you guys are very, very good independent retailers, Liz, but there are lots of retailers out there who probably do make a pig's ear of installation sometimes, or they've got some subbies in who haven't done it quite right. And therefore, it's not unreasonable, is it, to have an argument that says, let's check for that first before we start writing checks to you?
I think you're right. Yes, you need to have a look and make sure that it's installed properly and that it's not something else. But what I find really interesting is our preferred appliance supplier. We know those engineers and they've tried to pull us up once or twice and we've gone down there and politely corrected them. And they now go into jobs and if they know it's our job, they know it's not an installation issue because they know that we've done it right. But as soon as a client says, I want a different brand, and it's normally refrigeration or ventilation, the two things that become the issue, we always get a phone call. It's your installation. It's like, it's not our installation. It's exactly as it should be. And those are the circumstances where we now experience that. And it does very much feel like, well, no, just pass the buck. It's not our fault. It's not our product. It's not our reputation. We don't care. And we've got no relationship with them. So there's no reason for them to want to back us up either.
So are you saying that you think this is policy rather than individual decisions?
It probably isn't, but it can feel like it sometimes.
Yeah.
As I said earlier, I'm quite sure it isn't policy, but it very definitely does feel like it for sure. I mean, I'll give you a classic example with refrigeration, as Liz has already alluded to. It comes up quite frequently that tall fridges and freezers haven't been correctly installed. And I've stood in the room when an engineer has come in and he says, right, so is that the freezer or the fridge? And you've got, yeah. So, well, I can tell you right away, it's not been installed correctly. There's no plinth vent. And you go, have a closer look. This is a German kitchen cabinet. There's a shelf built into the housing unit to allow for ventilation underneath that shelf to avoid the need for a plinth vent. And they haven't even bothered looking. They've just immediately gone for the accusatory wagging of the finger, saying it's been incorrectly installed because I can't see a plinth vent. So who's telling them to do that? Is it years of experience of going out on site and recognising that on the vast majority of occasions, if there's no plinth vent fitted, then that's the fault? Or is it that somebody's told them to look for that and then blame it as the reason for the failure?
All right, let's rewind right back to the beginning where you've placed your order and it arrives. How much time do you have, Justine, to check to see if those products are fine?
So a lot of times it's 48 hours. And obviously, as you can imagine, ordering an entire, like one bathroom, if we think of it in isolation, just one bathroom, there's so many boxes for one bathroom, especially if it's big. 48 hours is not enough. But again, I do understand why people have to have some sort of, guidance. We can't just be delivering things and then expecting, 6 months down the line to get a phone call saying something's damaged. But 48 hours, in my opinion, is not long enough, depending on the product. So if it's very easy to check, fine. If it's a very complicated thing to check, 48 hours is not long enough.
Yeah, but like also, a £5 bath, for example.
Yeah. But also it's very, very difficult because, say, for example, you order a vanity unit. Let's just pick a product similar to kitchen units. You pick a vanity unit, it's massive. Nobody is going to get that entirely out of the box on receipt of delivery. Just nobody is going to do it. If you do, I feel like you're actually opening yourself up to encourage damage. So say, for example, we're telling people, you've got to take all of those products out of the box on day one and check that they're all okay. Even if you're not having your kitchen or your bathroom fitted for 3 weeks or whatever, take those products out. You're just asking for things to get damaged, in my opinion. But it's so hard, isn't it? Because in the same way, if we deliver something to a customer, we also wouldn't accept a call for damage like 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks later. We had a photograph from a customer recently. They had a damaged product and it'd been on site for 4 weeks. And in the photograph, and they had their own fitter, so it was not someone that we were connected to or knew. In the background, they had a toilet balancing on a stack of tiles, and on top of the toilet was a basin balancing on top of the toilet. So you just think, oh gosh, that probably hasn't been stored correctly, hasn't been looked after properly. But we replaced the product anyway because we do understand that things are difficult to look after on site. So if it's a small cost, we'll just replace the product anyway for customer service perspective. But it is hard, isn't it? I think it's a really difficult subject to discuss because I do see it from everyone's point of view.
Nick, what do you think over in Kitchenland? How much time is 48 hours about right?
It depends on the product. So as we've spoken about, if you've got large appliances like a fridge freezer, if you take a fridge freezer out of its packaging when it's delivered here, there is no way you're getting that back packaged up in a condition where you can then safely transport it out to site without incurring damage. So the reality is, it isn't getting it inspected until it comes out of the packaging on site, because to do so would be idiotic, really, because you're just running a huge risk of damage. And that's the same for ovens, dishwashers. You really struggle to repackage one of these products back in the packaging. The polystyrene, it comes apart in pieces as you take it off. You're not repackaging it. So, that's appliances. Doors, it's the same thing. You get 20 doors, 25 doors in. The cabinet maker that I use, they're really good. They inspect on receipt for us now, and they highlight damages. I've gone down the route of the door supplier that I use. One of the reasons that I use them is that if I have issues, that it's basically a no quibble swap, and they'll send out a replacement. I've got a door supplier which is a lot more local to me, still a big door supplier, and they were an absolute nightmare to deal with, because every damaged door, a photo wasn't good enough. You had to order a replacement door, that would get invoiced to you, and then you would have to arrange uplift of the damaged door and get that back to their depot. And only at the point that they then agreed that it was a defect in the damage would they recredit the replacement cost, and you would pay an additional carriage on top of that. And they opened the door actually to the door supplier that I pardon the pun, to the supplier that I now use, because of the fact that it wasn't the pricing, and generally the product was pretty good. It was all down to the back end service, again, just creating resistance to try and avoid any responsibility. And if you look at what the door supplier now use have done, they look at it and go, we're painting, I don't know how many 100,000 doors a year. Let's be honest, they're not all going to be perfect, are they? There's going to be some defects. So they know that there's a percentage going through that through their distribution that are going to have defects. So as long as you're running within their expected return and reporting range, they'll issue a swap for you. The other distributors must be able to do that, and must be able to recognize that they're not perfect either, but some of them are creating these huge barriers to try and avoid that cost. And I think Justine's been a little bit generous, really, saying, oh, well, there's all the cost associated with doing that. Yeah, there is cost associated with doing it, but some of the suppliers want us to bear all of the cost of that.
You're too nice, Justine.
Damage, rather than themselves, rather than it being shared. So
Justine's the nicest woman in bathrooms.
Cheers.
No, I think a lot of people would disagree with that. But I think I'm very fair. I might not be the nicest person in bathrooms, but I think I am fair. So I do understand, and I actually never scream and shout. In the past, I used to scream and shout, more so when I was a manager for somebody else, because I used to feel like, I'm going to get a bollock in here unless I sort this out. But since I've had my own company, I don't scream and shout, because really I feel like that gets you nowhere. Just fairness. So if I give fairness, I expect that back. And you have got to try and think about how many phone calls we get is minute in comparison to how many phone calls a national manufacturer would get, or a global manufacturer would get. And I do empathise. I empathise with the individual, because we've all been there. You know what it's like when you get 10 phone calls a day and they're all problems? That's just like awful. So imagine that for all of the accounts that they look after. Like I actually do sympathise. I do empathise. But I wish that it wasn't the case. I wish that we were looked after better. And I wish that it's all good and well to be, we're pro-independence when things are going well. But that doesn't feel like that's always the case when things are going badly. And, it would be nice if we were more united as an industry and people felt that they needed to be fair to us, because I don't think that is always the case.
I mean, Trevor, you have a warehouse, don't you?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So you're obviously taking orders in and out of there all day, every day. Do you have like a team of guys just checking the products over, or what do you do?
Well, yes, we do effectively. But as Nick and the others have already alluded, packaged items stay packaged because that's when they're at their safest. So the visual inspection of packaging is the only thing we do in the warehouse initially. And if there's no external visible signs of damage to the packaging, then it goes on the shelf or on the pallet for that particular client's job and doesn't get touched again until it's unwrapped on site. Because as Nick has said, as soon as you start unwrapping stuff, then you're leaving the door open for it to get damaged under your watch and not the manufacturer's. We tend to take quite a hard line, though, which is that you can put 48 hours or 72 hours to notify us of damage on your paperwork all day long. But as far as we're concerned, that product might sit on a warehouse shelf with us for a month before going on site. And it's the 48 hours after it's arrived on site that the clock starts ticking as far as we're concerned. And if you don't like that, well, tough, because that's our rules, not your rules. Things like Belfast sinks, ceramic sinks in general, most of the suppliers that we use for those, they insist on inspection on delivery because fire clay is such a product that is prone to manufacturing fault that their own experience has taught them that they don't check stuff themselves into their warehouses, but they do insist that we check, and we can't sign for a delivery unless it's signed as having been inspected first. And the rejection rate on fire clay on ceramic sinks is surprisingly high. It's probably sort of 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 sinks gets rejected for some little blister, bubble, blemish, or chip out of the fire clay that would otherwise have gone unnoticed. The but to that, of course, is that you've then got to wait for the replacement to come in. So, we're always ordering stock for clients to come in at least 10 days prior to requirement so that we've got a second bite of the cherry on the next week's delivery to replace a stock item. Nick deals with door suppliers the same as we do. I mean, we deal with German furniture, which is complete, and we also deal with door suppliers and UK carcass manufacturers. And we drill all our own doors in the warehouse. So that's a dual role for our warehouse staff, and that's our inspection point. So when all door deliveries come in, then they all get inspected prior to being popped for hinges. And kind of the rule is if you've drilled it for hinges and you've then reported a fault, well, that's your lookout. You should have inspected it before you drilled it for hinges. So that's fine. We understand that. Because if it's a painted to order and it's on 4-week delivery, and we report a faulty paint job on a door that we want for next week's kitchen, and we've got to wait 3 to 4 weeks for it to be replaced, then lots of hurried phone calls have to be made about sort of jumping the queue and getting the replacement sorted out. And hopefully most of the time they do arrive in time, though sometimes there's a bit nip and tuck.
So Liz, I mean, you talked about your sink supplier there. How much of a factor is all of this in choosing the suppliers that you have? I mean, have you now said we'll never buy another sink from them ever again because their service has been poor? How much do you factor all this in? Is it just how it is, and therefore we'll supply who we want to supply, or is it shaping your brands that you would use?
With sinks, I don't think we've got a particularly good relationship with anyone. So come down on it. It's better the devil you know. It's one issue in 20 years. Hopefully it'll be another 20 years until that happens. But yeah, we do tend to find that the people element of it makes a big difference. And we have one very big supplier where our rep is threatening to retire, and we are concerned about what that leaves us in terms of relationship. And I think it'll open the door for us looking beyond where we are potentially when that does happen, because the service, the responsiveness does have an impact on it. So we don't want to waste time chasing things to get sorted. We want to know that we can hand it over and we will get a phone call back, even if it's I haven't got an update for you. So that level of service being there. But as Justine said earlier, that since COVID, I think the focus on that level of service to us has definitely declined as a whole, and it is just the point of manufacturers not investing in the sales element. So, if for us as small businesses, when it goes quiet, you have a choice. You stop pushing and stop spending money and stop marketing, or you continue getting yourself out there, making sure you're building the best relationship, making sure people are still seeing you. And I think manufacturers have pulled away from doing that for us as small businesses a little, potentially.
Right. So let's round this up then with the question about the most important element in all of this, which is the customer. So Justine, when you're in these conversations with customers, who do you blame? Do you say, oh my God, my suppliers are nightmares? Or do you just say, no, we're trying to sort it out for you, and you don't sort of apportion blame in that way? How do you handle that conversation?
I never blame, because, that's, where does that get anybody? So if I were to say, oh, it's your installer, or you should have checked it, or, we should have, someone in my company should have checked it, or the man, whatever. There's no good comes of blame, because this is when I get frustrated when people on the manufacturer's end do that with us. So I just say to the customer, no matter what problem any of our customers ever have, our first response is, I just want you to know we are going to sort this for you, no matter how much it costs, no matter what it takes. You're not going to be left with a problem. Please just give me a couple of days or 24 hours. I'll come back to you with a solution. That really helps, because I think people expect you to do the blame game. So when you do the opposite, they absolutely love that. Even if they've got a big problem, and even if it's going to take ages to fix, at least you've given them the reassurance that you do care, and you've given them the opposite response to what they expected, which I think now is kind of like a response that you get no matter what. Even if you buy something, as just a consumer out there in the world, so many people just, it's just frustrating, like customer service. I'm getting myself tied up in knots a bit, because I get frustrated when I think about it. I get frustrated when I talk about it. Coming from a customer service background, from hospitality, the customer service is so important in hospitality. And then I just think the world has changed so much that it's not important now. And it is, it's what sets us apart. So we just give the best customer service we can, and then we just sort it out behind the scenes. We sort it out afterwards.
Well, I was going to ask the others then, but absolutely none of you are going to disagree with that, are you? Because Justine just sounded like a Christmas movie. I think time's beating us here. We could clearly go around the answers with this one. So we'll revisit it at some point in the future, but thank you very much.
Can I just say, though, Andy, before you cut off, some manufacturers are great. It's easy to focus on the negative. Maybe we should do one on how good manufacturers are as well one day.
Absolutely, yeah, we'll do that. We'll definitely do that one. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Yes,